Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're diving straight into some absolutely chilling reports from 2025 and 2026. We are acting as your investigative guides here, really digging into a deeply unsettling question. What actually happens when the massive machinery of national security is suddenly turned inward on everyday working citizens?
Exactly. We're going to be piecing together raw, hard facts from the past couple of years to show you a literal blueprint of administrative overreach in America. We're not using abstract academic theory here. We're looking at how democratic norms are actively being dismantled right in front of us.
Right, because when you just read individual headlines, a protest down in Texas, a ruined reflecting pool in DC, a local poll worker confronted in New York, it all feels kind of disconnected. But when you actually connect the dots, an undeniable picture emerges. And we want to show you exactly how this apparatus is functioning on the ground, starting at the most relatable working class level.
So let's get right into it with our first section, looking at how the process itself has become the punishment. We're talking about the devastating human and economic cost of short-term 48 to 72-hour ICE administrative holds. The most terrifying part? You don't even need a formal conviction to have your entire life completely ruined. Think about it. Step 1 is just an unexplained absence because you were suddenly detained.
And if you're an hourly worker, missing just 1 or 2 shifts usually means step 2, immediate job loss, which triggers a brutal cascade. Without that paycheck, step 3 hits hard. You miss rent, landlords file for rapid eviction, and your car gets impounded from wherever you were arrested, racking up insane daily storage fees. And then step 4, the absolute worst part. Since half of all detainees are sole caretakers for their children, this sudden disappearance frequently triggers emergency interventions by Child Protective Services.
And when you look at the raw demographics, it is incredibly clear who bears the harshest brunt of this immediate economic destruction. For just a 1 to 3 day hold, a staggering 64% of Black workers and 50% of multiracial workers lose their jobs immediately, compared to 36% of white workers.
Yeah, this isn't just some unfortunate bureaucratic side effect. It's a deliberate, blunt tool of domestic control aimed squarely at everyday people. It's literally bankrupting workers and tearing families apart without a single criminal charge ever being filed.
Which leads us perfectly into Section 2, testing loyalty through absurdity. This domestic control, it definitely extends into state narratives too. It acts like a loyalty test that separates a compliant in-group from a targeted out-group. Just look at the insane contrast surrounding the $14.7 million failure of the newly renovated Lincoln Memorial reflecting pool.
Right. On one side, you have the official government story, which literally claims that, quote-unquote, leftist saboteurs maliciously carved a 300-foot gash into the pool liner with razor blades and then pumped in chemical fertilizers to turn the water green. But on the other side, we have the undeniable forensic reality confirmed by aquatic scientists and materials engineers. And spoiler alert, it wasn't sabotage.
The reality is an absolute mess of incompetence. The reports show the government bypassed standard bidding for a rushed contract. They filled the pool with untreated tidal basin water in the dead of summer, which obviously caused a natural algae bloom known as new pond syndrome. And then, in a total panic to clean it up, they dumped in highly concentrated 12% hydrogen peroxide, which chemically stripped the uncured paint. So what about those supposed razor gashes? They were actually structural microfissures caused by heavy presidential armored SUVs driving directly over the wet paint for a photo op. The paint literally just peeled off in massive sheets.
But instead of admitting that massive engineering failure, authorities arrested David Hearn, a retired U.S. Olympian, branding him a saboteur. Video evidence actually shows Hearn was simply out on a public bicycle ride and merely touched a piece of the liner that was already floating loose in the water. Political analysts point out that this is a textbook authoritarian tactic. The state creates this intentionally fragile, physically impossible lie, like a 300-foot razor cut on industrial material, because forcing the public to repeat it or just accept it is a submission test. They want to see who will blindly submit to their authority. And that demand for absolute compliance brings us to Section 3, where they are actively criminalizing the ballot box. This same federal apparatus is stepping directly into the sacred space of local voting booths to criminalize civilian dissent over totally mundane social media posts. Take a look at this post from Paige Lynn Gonya, a New York election worker. In January 2026, she posted this completely legal opinion to her personal Instagram about an ICE agent involved in a highly publicized shooting. Now, it is absolutely crucial to note that the agent's name was already public information. It had just been published by the Minnesota Star-Tribune. She was just sharing a political opinion based on major newspaper reporting, without dropping any private addresses or anything like that. Yet 5 months later, Armed federal agents from DHS and ICE physically tracked her down while she was working inside an active Syracuse polling place during the state primaries. They completely bypassed New York state election laws, which strictly restrict non-voting law enforcement from entering polling places without an active emergency, no local warrant, no active emergency, just armed agents demanding she sign an unsigned administrative warning and completely delete her account. It was a terrifying extrajudicial display of intimidation designed to silence political dissent right in the middle of a democratic election.
Which brings us to the really heavy stuff in Section 4, handing down decades in prison for civilian dissent. Because the criminalization of dissent doesn't stop at intimidation at the polls. It escalates to handing down functional life sentences to everyday citizens. 100 years. That is the staggering maximum statutory penalty handed down to former Marine reservist Benjamin Song after a chaotic 2025 protest outside a Texas ICE facility. And while Song was accused as a shooter, it's the sentences of the other people there that are truly terrifying. Other participants who were merely present at the demonstration protesting federal infrastructure were slapped with 50 to 70-year prison terms. 70 years just for showing up to a protest. So how does the DOJ legally manufacture these functional life sentences? They use a terrifying prosecutorial strategy called sentence stacking. Instead of serving time for individual charges concurrently, meaning all at the same time, judges ordered the sentences to run consecutively, back to back. They applied a sweeping federal terrorism enhancement to the entire group, prosecuting them under a 2025 executive order that labeled Antifa a domestic terrorist organization. So by legally declaring this decentralized ideology as an organized cell, the actions of one person became a conspiracy charge for everyone, artificially inflating their prison time to ensure these massive sentences.
And this strategy stretches far beyond anyone actually physically at the protest. Just look at Daniel Sanchez Estrada. He received a 30-year federal prison sentence. He wasn't even at the protest. He's just the spouse of a participant. But because he moved some boxes of left-wing zines and activist pamphlets out of his house after a phone call, they charged him with concealing evidence of a terrorist conspiracy. They literally turned a simple association into a life-ending conspiracy conviction. And that chilling reality brings us to our final section, the architecture of exclusion. When you connect all these dots, the economic destruction of working-class people, the loyalty tests, the massive sentences for simple association, you reveal a deeply unsettling systemic architecture behind all this administrative control. The source material actually presents the modern clinical political science definition of a concentration camp. It's a facility used by executive or administrative decree to detain civilians outside the standard rule of law, based purely on demographic category rather than individual trials. A punitive prison requires a trial and due process. This definition, it maps directly and undeniably onto how today's ICE administrative detainers operate. Now, if that specific term causes a bit of internal resistance for you, the reports offer a really clear historical mirror that we all understand, Executive Order 9066, which created the World War II Japanese-American internment camps. When you compare that alongside the 2025-2026 ICE administrative holds, the similarities are staggering. Both of these systems operate under the exact same mechanisms. They both rely on an executive emergency declaration to completely bypass standard civil rights protections and suspend the normal legal order. The structural parallels are right there in plain sight. In 1942, just like today, there were no individual criminal charges and absolutely no due process. There was the immediate destruction of property and livelihoods. Detainment was based strictly on administrative classifications. And the courts showed absolute deference to these so-called executive emergencies.
The exact structures that we were all raised to view as fundamentally un-American and horrific, detention without trial and unchecked executive authority, they are actively operating right now in our own backyards.
We really have to look at these undeniable facts without flinching. We're looking at a state apparatus that can bankrupt an hourly worker without a single charge, invent absurd stories of sabotage to demand compliance, and lock away a spouse for 30 years over pamphlets. So as we wrap up this explainer, the source material leaves us with one incredibly urgent question that we all need to be asking ourselves right now. If the legal order can be suspended for them today, what exactly protects you tomorrow? Thank you for joining us. Stay vigilant and keep asking questions.